Hi, everybody. Welcome back to KETIV Virtual Academy. I hope your Thursday morning is going great, or if you're on the East Coast, your Thursday afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have Michelle Stone with us for the first time here on a KVA. She brings a really good depth of knowledge around the PLM world, and she's worked with a lot of PLM solutions, and she came to KETIV recently, and we're excited to have her on today. She's going to be sharing with us, really just the differences between PLM and PDM, and how we're going to manage change across the life cycle more effectively by using PLM rather than traditional PDM approaches. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Michelle and let her jump into the topic today. Michelle, off to you.
All right, thanks, DJ. I like to spend most of my time actually in the application, so I promise not to give you guys too many slides, but let's just go over a few things here. My agenda for today is a brief overview, what our goals are for this learning session, talk a little bit about PDM versus PLM and where it makes sense to do what sorts of changes, and then jump right into the application. So I had kind of my description there if you didn't see it before. And again, just want to let people know what some of the benefits of doing change management in a PLM solution versus just a PDM solution. Kind of kick in on some of the extras that you get when you do it in PLM. So just a little bit of background. As DJ mentioned, this is my first KVA. I attended quite a few of them in my early days in the Autodesk ecosystem and learned a lot about Vault. I'm a PLM solution engineer. So what does that even mean? I'm responsible for PLM delivery here at KETIV. I really get a lot of enjoyment of working with customers and getting them up and running on PLM solutions and helping the whole enterprise see the value. As he mentioned, I've been around the block. I've been passionate about PLM since 1999. I included my photo from my last AU class. I think that was AU 2020 or 2021 when I was talking about PLM in Las Vegas. Worked on several different solutions in different roles. I started my career as a consultant, so I'm really happy to bookend what's probably my last decade as a consultant again, because I really find a lot of joy in that. They asked me to do a couple of fun facts, so I figured I'd do a personal and a professional one. The professional one, when I worked at Autodesk, we actually had an adoption team that helped people get up and running on PLM, and we were asked to write down what was our favorite, feature or capability of the Autodesk at the time Fusion Lifecycle solution, and mine actually hasn't changed even in 10 years. It's still the workflow engine, and that's something that we'll dive into when we get into into the demo. So I thought that was kind of a nice full circle moment to still get to talk about change management now with KETIV. And personally, I'm a big fan of attending live music concerts, and I like to prepare for them by listening to podcasts about the composer or the piece. So I have one coming up with the alumni orchestra for the Philharmonic with movie music, so I'll learn more about John Williams. All right, so let's talk about change management and what that means in terms of a PDM solution versus a PLM solution. And really kind of my opinion. I always feel like I need a safe harbor statement whenever I do learning sessions or webinars, because a lot of times it's in my opinion, but these opinions are based on fact. So in my mind, and I started my career in just PDM, so no shade to Vault. But it's more impactful when you're doing your change management processes in a PLM solution where you can bring in the rest of the enterprise. So it's more than just engineering. When you're managing, things in the PDM, you're really focused on, those CAD related changes. It's more focused on, CAD files and, very limited in scope. And you have, I would say, fewer levers to press in terms of setting up, how you can do that change order process. It's a little more rigid versus a cloud-based PLM solution like Fusion Manage. It gives you a lot of opportunities to configure the system the way your company works. And we'll show that fairly soon. I also added a couple other bullet points in there, and this is, across the board, the reason for doing, these activities in an enterprise solution like PLM is you get that traceability. And we'll see that when we look at the kind of like the history in the workspace, where who did what, when, where, why, how. All of that is captured in an audit trail in the PLM system. And in addition to capturing who did it, you also get to try to figure out like what are some of the bottlenecks. Like why is it taking us 3 weeks to release this change? It gives you that opportunity to look at some reporting and some key KPIs, key process indicators. Everybody knows the saying, what gets measured gets managed, and that's where Fusion Manage really helps you. I think the other part that you'll often hear when you talk to PLM people, we always spot off this single source of truth. And I really do feel that even though that saying's been around for, I don't know, 25 plus years, it's true. You kind of break down those silos when you have all of your information in one place, and people can self-serve and find. And when as related to change management, you'll see that you have one place to go to see the work that you need to do to help your company get their product development right. Um, Again, you get a little bit of process governance when you have these systems in place that have defined criteria for how do you go about making a change. How do you tie that in from like something that came in from quality. So again, that's one of the other benefits I see in doing it in PLM. And of course, you have to say AI. I think it's a rule these days. But I've done a lot of work in the past couple of years with some of my training. Before I came to KETIV, I was a product manager, and really focused on the applications of AI in the PLM solution. I read something yesterday by one of the PLM analysts, Christine Longwell, and she said, I firmly believe companies with disparate, unconnected systems will have to address their digital backbones before AI will provide value. And that's very true. Like having that, go back a couple bullet points, single source of truth, gives you the opportunity to then use an AI tool on top of that enterprise system, for a variety of cases. And maybe that's a whole nother KVA that we can talk about some of the ways that at least in the change management realm, you could use AI to think about your next best actions or summarizing information so you can get up to speed quickly on the reason for the change. All right, next up, as I said, I'm not a big fan of a ton of slides, so let's go and demo. So I kind of put a little roadmap on here of what I'm hoping to show in Fusion Manage. I like to start on the home page. And keep in mind, depending on who you are in the audience, I'll have a little bit for everybody, and I may break and talk just to the admins. But I always think it's important for end users too to know the capabilities of the solution. So even if you're not an admin at your company, it's nice to know what they can do in the back end. And that's why we'll do that little peek under the hood where, I want to talk about some of the capabilities you have in Fusion Manage that you may not have in the PDM system, for doing reminders and escalations and delegations and kind of the hooks you have for automating things through a really simple scripting engine, and talk about how easy it is to add different states and transitions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to jump right into Fusion Manage. Okay, so if you haven't seen it before, here's Fusion Manage. It's a web-based cloud PLM solution. You'll notice I'm just putting an address in a browser. I actually logged out just so you guys could see how easy it is to sign in and get up and running, in Fusion Manage. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. I will make one note that I actually have my two-factor authentication turned off just for, ease of the webinar, but that's something that if it's important at your company, you do have two-factor authentication. That comes into play too if you're doing things like digital signatures. But again, this is where your landing page for Fusion Manage. I'm going to go through, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I really want to dig into just change management, but it's always fun to kind of show off the features. of it. You have that ability to have charts, and these are specific to an end user. So that's something that's really interesting based on your persona. You may care about certain things where somebody else may not. So it's fully configurable to what you want to see. For example, let's say I wanted to add something else about, change orders maybe, or change requests. I want to see the average cost over the month. I can quickly go and add that. And any of the reports that are set up are available here. Sounds like another learning session in the future. We can talk about, reporting and charts and all of that good stuff. But as it relates to change management, what I really like, and when I'm onboarding users to Fusion Manage, I like to let them know the My Outstanding Work gives you a good idea of what's on your plate. What do you have to get done? So again, you can go in here and see that. You also have the ability to bookmark, and you also have a nice view of your recently viewed items. So for like ease of navigation, when you log in the morning, you get to see it. But we're going to go ahead. I actually bookmarked the change request. I'm going to navigate to that change request and talk about a few different things regarding that. If you're not familiar with it, a really standard paradigm in, product development is, you have this concept of a change request. Somebody, wants to make a change to the product, and you'll do some review and analysis before you do a formal engineering change order in ECO. I'm trying to spell out any of the terminology if you're not familiar with it. One thing I'd like to show real quick, which is a little in the weeds, but I think it's a good way to understand the richness of Fusion Manage. I'm going to do a quick pop out to the Learning Center and talk about kind of like the default, what you get. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. Right now, we're going to focus here on change management. But when you get Fusion Manage, it's a full PLM solution where you get PLM and QMS solution. QMS is quality management. But again, you have the ability to do your product development. And this is the kind of information you're used to seeing in a tool like Vault, where you can get your information about your items and your bill of materials from Vault. But then again, it's that other personas in your company, those other players that are doing work. You may have your program management team, working on portfolio manage and new product introduction. Again, topics for another KVA. You have your concepts of, ideation and requirements gathering, a really great way to do collaboration in the supply chain if you've got contract manufacturers or joint development manufacturing as part of your DNA, quality management. But let's mostly stick here in change management. The reason I wanted to bring this up is to understand that change doesn't happen in a vacuum. One of the benefits of using a solution like Fusion Manage is you get to see those connections of, well, what caused us to even look at this change request? What happened in quality? So let's go back over and look at this change request. And you can see here, I'm just focusing on one record. We can talk about some of the other abilities to see things later. But you have this opportunity to fill out information that may be important. We'll see here there was an inconsistent layer adhesion for this. I believe this is the printer. You can fill in details. You can fill in here. You can see this is the item. We talked about, what's coming from potentially Vault or another design system that was impacted by this. What are the causes? You can, add, images as needed. Sorry, close off really quick. Got some of your indicators of where you're at. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is, well, where did this stem from? We can see there was a problem report that may have been, filled out in the field that they saw this error, they saw this issue. And one thing that's really great with the solution is you get that ability to kind of get that little breadcrumb chain of what happened. So there was a problem report, and that spawned this change request to come in. So somebody's going to go in here and they're going to look, again, they'll have that item that was there. Let me make this a little bigger. I'm actually going to go back to the first page to show you. I get excited and I forget. Um, Here, like, let's say I want to know a little more about that problem report. You can stay in the context of the change request so you can do your job. We're wearing the hat of maybe a change analyst, but I can preview and see, well, what happened to even start us going down this path of looking at, do we need to make a change? So I can easily go in and take a look at some of the information about that without, going away from where I'm at. But I really want to pop over into the workflow, just to kind of show you, well, where are we at? What happens next? So let me just, there's some tools on the bottom for zooming in, zooming out. You have that ability to see, that history. I talked about the audit trail, the who did what, when, where, why. All of that is captured. Let me just center this a little bit. And again, this is high level. We can do other sessions in the future going in more. But just want to talk about, this level of process governance you're not necessarily going to have in a PDM solution. So you can kind of follow along here. When we get into the admin section, I can kind of show you how these are set up. I like these little sticky notes to let people know if they're looking at a process in Fusion Manage, because we'll see this workflow throughout the solution. You'll see, somebody creates it, they decide to review it, they kind of do that analysis, like, well, do we want to make a change? You can kind of fast track it and skip like a configuration control board if you don't need it, or you can have a more formal process. Again, all of this is configurable to what makes sense with your business. And you'll see here, someone reviewed this and said, yeah, we would like to make a change. So before I go to the change, I'd like to talk about some of the automations that come standard. When the change order is finished, well, we can automatically complete the change request. And that helps from like a timing perspective when you want to do some of that management, of information, looking for bottlenecks, looking for trends. But I'm just going to go back here, and I'm going to see over here, I have a change order. So I'm actually going to navigate again, standard, uh, cloud-based technology. I could right click and open this in a new tab, or I can just navigate straight to it. And I'll see, I think I probably should have done the other tab, but bear with me. A lot of this information just came over from the change order. So it really, sorry, from the change request. So it really helps, in terms of that non-value add work, like, creating another form. You can just easily copy over the pertinent information from the change request to the change order. That's something where we see a lot of savings in time. I'm going to open this in a new tab. One of the other things that's kind of pre-built, and you can decide what makes sense for your company, is kind of these, what tasks do you do time and time again on every change request, on every change order, rather than having to fill that out. You can just, pre-fill it in, on every change order. If it's been approved, you're going to have tasks to update, your designs, maybe inform a supplier, maybe you need to do new training material or new work instructions, or, manufacturing information. So you can get like this set of tasks. And then every time I create the change order, it'll go in and it'll create, both the tasks that are relevant for the change order, as well as a schedule. So again, like, if you're a program manager and you're looking at, trying to see when something's going to happen, you've got a really good view of it right there. I'm going to just quickly go through. We don't have to read every section, but again, you get this nice way to kind of group information together. I've got my summary, my details, any of that other information. There's those tasks that we were talking about. I don't have this filled out since it's a demo tenant, but you can put down like, who are your stakeholders, who might need to be involved. And then we have our approval matrix, who needs to actually do the sign off and get this change order through the process. And you have that concept of required, based on certain criteria, you're always going to want this group of people to be your approvers, but you have the opportunity to add ad hoc people. And what else did I want to look at? Just kind of showing through that, you've got, a lot of capability, and all of this came configured, I'd say out of the box, but it's really out of the cloud. Comes configured. We can tweak it, right? Based on your company. I mean, let's go back up to like details. Maybe you want like a different name for one of these labels. Those are really simple configuration changes that can be made. Yeah, obviously, I mean, I'm not going to go through all the tabs. You have the opportunity to add attachments, right? Maybe as you're doing your change request, if there's content that would be helpful for the reviewers. The affected items should be fairly familiar. It's basically saying these are the things that are going to change, and it's going to go from Rev A to Rev B. I have some information over here. If you remember on that first slide, we talked about some of the benefits of doing change management in PLM versus PDM. One of the few I brought up were things like impact assessment and, what's going to happen with, quantity you have on hand. How are you going to disposition it? So you can go and, pull information from your ERP system. That's the system that owns that sort of information. But to be able to make decisions, you can go ahead and take a look. And again, keep in mind, it's not like you write a change order and do all the work in an hour or two. There's, things that happen over time. That's why I really wanted to show on that front dashboard. You have the ability for work that's assigned to you or things you looked at recently when you come in the next day. So I think we covered most of those. We'll get over to the workflow in a second. Yeah, let's do the workflow first, and then I'll talk about workflow notifications. That's another one of the features I really like. Similar to what we saw with the change request, you have this opportunity to set up a flow that makes sense for your company. We give you a best practice. So the way that the Fusion Manage was developed was, looking at industries and seeing, what's a typical ECR and ECO flow and kind of put that in there as a starting point. Again, you can tweak it. Like, if you don't, we'll go and look in the back end in a second. I'll show you how easy it is to tweak this. I want to talk about a couple of the things that you'll see in here that are really good visual indicators for your end users. You'll notice that this gets locked down. So you know that, okay, you can maybe your change analyst can do the work that they need to do earlier in the process, but at some point we're going to lock this down. And once it's finally approved, we'll release it. And let me get that little gear icon to show. So this is a managed state. So what this means, if we go back to the affected items, this is what causes the items that you have to go from Rev A to Rev B. And then, when everything's all done, it'll show implemented. Now I'm going to open up the admin and look on the back end, and you'll see there's a little more on this workflow than what the end user sees. And I promise I'll come back to workflow notifications because if I had to pick a second favorite, that might have been mine. So I'm an administrator, so I'm going to open up the Workspace Manager in the back end. And you'll see real quick, again, not going to go into great detail, but you get all of these, what we call workspaces. If you're coming from another tool, it might be something called a world or a custom object, if you're, depending on where you are. You get all of this with Fusion Manage, and then you control what people see. They don't have to see everything, just what's relevant to them. But we're just going to pick on change orders. And even though there's a lot here we could talk about, I promised DJ I wasn't going to take 4 hours. So we're just going to pop in and look at the workflow editor. And if you remember what it looked like before, we see some things that weren't on the on what we were looking at before. Sorry about that. My mouse is not cooperating with me. There we go. I'm going to make it a little smaller. I'll make it bigger in a second. You'll see there's some extra arrows that we didn't see on the map. There's this whole thing over here about sending things to ERP. That's kind of like in the back end. The end user doesn't necessarily need to see that. But let's dig in. Let me make this a little bigger, assuming I can, let me see. Let me do there we go. I knew there were some tools somewhere. We'll zoom in a little bit. we'll talk a little bit about some of the bits that I think are pretty interesting, and we'll save maybe some of the things that happen with scripting for another KVA. One problem, I don't know if you see it, but you ask somebody to do something and they don't do it, and you wait and they don't do it again. One thing I like about Fusion Manage is we can really easily go and set reminders. So let's say that DJ was supposed to perform this change and it's still in that state. Well, I can send them a reminder every 10 days and say, hey, I need you to review it. And I could even remind him, 3 times. That's again some of that little extras that you get that you can configure that makes sense for your company. So let's say I reminded DJ 5 times he hasn't done anything. I also have the opportunity to enable something we call escalations. That I say, well, after 20 days, if DJ hasn't done his work, I'm going to do something. I can tell his manager. I could like automatically move this to the next stage. I have some different options. That's one of the things I really like. Um, to have kind of that control and those levers that you can push to make sure the work's getting done. We talked a little bit about notifications. There's, different things to think about. One is the notifications you see in that My Outstanding Work. And I think let me go on here. I can say here, do I want to display that in their outstanding work? I can also send them an email, that happened. And, maybe we'll talk a little more about, all the different ways you can review and approve things. Again, there's a lot here that we're not going to go into today. I talked a little bit about that opportunity to do scripting, meaning having things happen automatically. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about notifications, and then I promise we'll come back to the workflow editor. But one of the things I really liked is these workflow notifications where obviously you're going to send things to My Outstanding Work or emails to the people who have to do the work, but you often have stakeholders that might just want to be, informed. So I could go in and I could say, anytime something goes to the change control review, I want to let my entire executive team know. They're probably not involved in the work, but this way I can notify them. Or if I have specific users, like maybe I have, suppliers that I don't want to send it to every supplier in my system, but I really know that Sally supplier needs to know that we had this layer adhesion problem. So I just wanted to pop in on that, but let's go back to the back end and make sure I covered all the favorite things and fun things I wanted to talk about on here. Um, we're not going to talk about access controls too much now, other than you have a lot of flexibility and you can be as granular as you want. Fun fact, that was my first AU class in 2012 was I think it was called Everything You Need to Know About Access Controls in, I think it was called PLM 360 at the time. We keep it really general, when we deliver it to a customer. But then one of the activities that I like to work with people is, maybe getting a little more granular on, who can do what, because that kind of gives you a little more control on it. So I wanted to cover that. And then again, there's just a lot of information in here. We talked before, like we have these notes. I can go in and add a note and say, this is for the demo. And I can hide this on the online map so nobody sees it. But yeah, that's, I know, a little fast and furious. I'm going to close out of here. The other thing I like too is it'll denote down here if I have unsaved changes or if I have anything that's not valid. So when I'm actually doing admin work, I like to go in here and take a look and see if I need to change. I'm actually not going to save this since we were just playing around. All right, so phew, that was a lot in a small amount of time, but I hope it gave you a little bit of a sense of what we can do in Fusion Manage. Let me pop back over to our slide deck. All right, so that was a fun little demo that gave you a little taste of what's out there for change management in Fusion Manage. As I said, I'm really excited to be here and would love to, talk to everybody and give some learning sessions on a variety of topics. But what's next? It's a really great time if you're interested in learning more about Fusion Manage and PLM, if it's the right stage for your company. There's a promo out there for Vault users that want to go and use Fusion Manage. There's a great new capabilities that came out just a couple months ago where we have a really tight connection between moving the information from PDM into PLM, because it is really important. I hope that nobody's coming away thinking like, oh, why do I have Vault? Vault is critical, right? Like for your engineering team, it's critical to have that, rev controlled information around all your product design information from either, mechanical CAD, electrical CAD. But what you bring into a PLM system is that, and layered on top of that, more information, like what do you need to get your product out to market? What do you need from a packaging perspective? What do you need from training material, like materials you might include, in your deliverable, or, some of the, buy components, right? Like a CAD system is great for the make components, but there are things that you might potentially buy and include in your product that aren't modeled in CAD. So that's where PLM kind of lets you enrich that product information. So Vault's great. I don't want anyone thinking I don't love Vault, because I do. But it's a great time to maybe get that next step of going that information from Vault and taking that next step for your company. So there's a good promo out there. We're also having a summit. Autodesk is hosting a PLM summit in Irvine, which is right in KETIV's backyard. So there'll be quite a few people from our company as well. This is happening in January, the first week. I think it's January 8th. Sorry I didn't put the date, but if you want more information, either reach out to your account representative or shoot me an email, michelle.stone@ketiv.com. I'm always happy to have a conversation to see if it makes sense. Something else we offer is a business process assessment. And this is for a company that wants to look and see, well, is it the right time for my company to deploy an enterprise solution like PLM? So it's really a high level assessment. What are the problems that you're seeing, at your company that you might want to fix? And it could be not just PLM. It could be, some automations maybe you need on the CAD side, or maybe, fixing up your vault, lots of different things. We can come in and find, any of the weak links and make some, suggestions on, what problem is your company having? How can we help you solve that, with a variety of solutions, both from Autodesk and some of our other partners. So DJ added that QR code if you're interested, or there's the, ketiv.com/BPA. I've done a couple since I've been here over the past 2 months, and it's really interesting to learn how customers work and give some suggestions on how they can work even better. So with that, I was probably longer than DJ wanted, but that's not unusual for me. Thank you guys for having me for my first KVA, and looking forward to working together more.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Appreciate your expertise, and thanks for walking us through all that. This is our last one of the year, so everybody enjoy your holidays, and we're going to catch you in the new year. We got a lot of great content planned, so just stay tuned, and we'll see you in 2026, everyone. Thanks again, Michelle, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everyone.